There are some creepy coincidences in the entertainment industry. The way the two daughters from the original Poltergeist film both met early ends, the Muppets and the characters from Star Wars singing the Disney theme song back in 1980, when Disney wouldn't acquire the Muppets until 2004, or Star Wars until 2012. Not to mention all of the things the Simpsons have predicted. And professional wrestling is no different. I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling, and let's take a look at 7 creepy WWE coincidences. Now, before we get into this, we appreciate your support, so if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and La Magistral that notification bell. Number 1. The Ultimate Goodbye. It's kind of mind-blowing that this took place over 10 years ago, so you'll forgive me if I have to set the table a little bit. Vince McMahon was famously known for his ability to overlook almost anything if it meant he could make a buck. That means it didn't matter how badly someone screwed with Vince or World Wrestling Entertainment, he would be willing to mend fences. However, there were a handful of talents that looked like Vince was never going to be able to work with again. Once Vince's son-in-law Triple H started taking a more proactive role in the WWE Hall of Fame selection process, he started to gain a reputation as someone who was able to rebuild bridges with some of these past legends. In 2013, he did what many thought was impossible by convincing Bruno Sammartino to become a member of that year's Hall of Fame class. And he did it again the following year when the Ultimate Warrior returned for the same honor. Seriously, between that and him being buddy-buddy with CM Punk now, the guy practically deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. The Warrior's return in particular was very tricky, seeing as it wasn't just Vince that the Warrior had issues with. The Warrior had been having online tiffs for years with people like Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake Roberts. However, the creator of Distrucity was able to make peace with the people he'd had issues with in the past, introduce his beautiful family to the world, and enjoy a wonderful WrestleMania Hall of Fame weekend. Then, in a bit of a break from the usual Hall of Fame protocol, the Warrior was invited to Monday Night Raw to give yet another speech. We didn't read too much into it at the time, but the Warrior would say, "No WWE talent becomes a legend on their own. Every man's heart one day beats its final beat, his lungs breathe a final breath. If what that man did in his life makes his blood pulse through the body of others and makes them bleed deeper and something larger than life with his essence, his spirit will be immortalized." This is a wonderful sentiment, the fact that he will live on forever because he inspired us. However, none of us were prepared for what would happen the very next day when at 5:50 p.m., while walking to his car with his wife outside of their hotel in Arizona, he would fall to the ground clutching his chest. He was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead at the age of 54. The Ultimate Warrior legacy is a complicated one of a talent that would burn brightly and then vanish just as quickly, so in a way, maybe his passing was poetic. Number 2. Video game prediction. If you aren't a gamer, you're missing something really special with today's line of WWE video games. Don't get me wrong, I'm a Fire Pro guy first and foremost, and a No Mercy guy second and second most, but I can appreciate everything that goes into today's titles. Just a huge array of talents ranging from today's rosters to developmental to an insane amount of legends, match types, holy cow, everything from Hell in a Cell, Elimination Chamber, ambulance matches, and every year the story mode gets more and more complex, really true to life. But for a while there was one storyline that hit way too close to home. In SmackDown vs. Raw 2006, there was a segment where Eddie Guerrero would steal The Undertaker's urn, thus allowing Eddie to have complete control over the Demon of Death Valley. I'd say this was pretty dumb, but then again, this happened on the real show, so what do we know? The mission would climax with The Undertaker getting the best of Eddie Guerrero and choke-slamming him into a coffin. Again, none of this is particularly shocking. The Undertaker has been digging holes and taking souls for 15 years at this point, and the graven imagery was all just part of the show. SmackDown vs. Raw 06 was released on November 11th, 2005, and tragically, Eddie Guerrero would be found dead in his Minneapolis hotel room just 2 days later. Now, obviously this is all just a terrible coincidence, but it made for a very depressing reminder as people would play the game in the weeks and months following the tragedy. Number 3. Video Game Prediction Part 2. Unfortunately, SmackDown vs. Raw 06 wouldn't be the only time the team at THQ were eerily able to predict the future. In fact, the very next year, the release of SmackDown vs. Raw 07 saw a storyline play out between The Undertaker and Chris Benoit. Now, we didn't get anything quite as graphic as the Eddie Guerrero coffin imagery we saw the previous year, but one quote from The Undertaker gives us goosebumps. In it, he says, "If you insist on making this mistake, your grieving family will have no one to blame but you when the inevitable occurs." Yikes. I don't know if we necessarily need to spell this one out for you, but 8 months later, after this game was released, the horrific events happened in Fayetteville, Georgia. And that wasn't the only bizarre coincidence surrounding that terrible weekend. Number 4. Wiki Mystery. The first hint that something wasn't right at the Benoit house was when Chris no-showed house shows in the weekend leading up to the Vengeance pay-per-view on June 24, 2007. It was reported that Chris Benoit was going to defeat CM Punk for the vacant ECW title at that event. However, he was replaced by Johnny Nitro, who would go on to win the belt. The rumor at the time was that Chris needed to stay home because his family was dealing with a bout of food poisoning. However, shortly after midnight on the evening of the pay-per-view, an anonymous Wikipedia editor updated Chris Benoit's Wikipedia page to state that Nancy Benoit had passed away. Now, this update took place 12 to 13 hours before the Atlanta police would enter Benoit's Fayetteville, Georgia home and learn that Nancy Benoit was in fact dead. And as if this wasn't suspect enough, the IP address of the person who made the update was located in Stamford, Connecticut, where the corporate offices of World Wrestling Entertainment are located. Speculation ran rampant that someone outside of the Benoit house had information about what happened that terrible weekend before the police did. In fact, this is often quoted as a point of interest by conspiracy theorists who are convinced that Chris Benoit was framed. But according to Wikipedia administrator, if you look at the IP's other edits, it's pretty obvious that this was just a garden variety vandal whose vandalization sadly proved to be true. Needless to say, this anonymous poster became a person of interest in the investigation. He was eventually cleared of having any actual information and was quoted as saying, "Last weekend, I had heard about Chris Benoit no-showing because of a family emergency, and I heard rumors about why that was. I was reading rumors and speculation about this matter online, and one of them included that his wife may have passed away, and I did the wrong thing of posting it on Wikipedia, despite there being no evidence. I feel terrible about the mainstream coverage this has received. Hearing about my message becoming a huge part of the Benoit slangs made me feel terrible, as everyone believes that it's connected to the tragedy, but it was just an awful coincidence." The anonymous poster has vowed to give up on his life of inaccurate posting, which seems like what I would do if authorities came knocking on my door to ask about my connection to a double murder. Number 5. Extreme Hatred. Extreme Championship Wrestling is often romanticized for its revolutionary style, and rightfully so. The Guerrero-Malenko Classics, the United States debut of Rey Mysterio in Psychosis, and even several hardcore elements were way ahead of their time, but as far as a working environment, it wasn't always the best. Put aside the drug-fueled party lifestyle that the locker room embraced, you had the fact that Paul Heyman was constantly experiencing financial difficulties and by all accounts was holding everything together with duct tape and gum. Now, if you were a talent that didn't have a lot of options, you'd probably deal with the bouncing checks and hope for the best. For example, and I'm not pointing fingers, but let's say you're Danny Doring. You aren't getting the money you were promised, but you're on cable television, and the odds of you getting signed by WWE and WCW are probably not great at that time. But if you're someone like Mike Awesome, a jacked 6'6" ass kicker, you probably have a few options. And on the April 10th, 2000 episode of WCW Monday Nitro, he explored one of those options when he snuck up behind Kevin Nash and laid him out. The problem was, Awesome was still under ECW contract and was in fact the ECW World Champion. Now, this is all legally murky, as one of the provisions for a contract being valid is that the talent is being paid the amount of money stipulated within the contract, but needless to say, Awesome quickly became public enemy number 1 amongst the ECW faithful. After some legal wrangling, it was decided that Awesome would return to ECW for one night to drop the title to whoever Heyman wanted. And if you weren't around back then, know that this was one of the most shocking moments in pro wrestling history. Awesome wasn't even allowed in the ECW locker room. He dressed in his hotel room, was driven to the show by the head of WCW security, entered through the front door, lost a quick match, and then left. And if that wasn't strange enough, rather than having Awesome lose the belt to an ECW talent, Heyman ground a little salt into WCW's wounds by calling in a favor to WWE and having them send WWE wrestler Taz to be the one to defeat the WCW star. So, if you're keeping score, in that ring that night, a WWE wrestler defeated a WCW wrestler for the ECW World title. It was wild. Fast forward 5 years and the Monday Night Wars are now over. ECW and WCW both closed their doors and their assets have been purchased by WWE. The WWE is hosting an ECW tribute show that features an absolute banger of a rematch between Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka. Halfway through the bout, Mike Awesome would hit a dive to the outside, during which ECW announcer Joey Styles would say, "Suicide dive by Mike Awesome, and it's a shame he didn't succeed in taking his own life." It's pretty harsh. Surely Styles was just playing up the animosity that existed back when Awesome had made the jump to WCW. The comment was dark when he first said it, but it aged even worse when Mike Awesome would take his own life less than 2 years later. Number 6. Stone Cold Coincidence. At WrestleMania 13, Steve Austin refused to submit to Bret Hart's sharpshooter and in doing so became the most popular man in the company. Throughout the summer, he was the star of the show, seemingly building to a rematch with Bret Hart at the following WrestleMania and his coronation as the WWE Champion. However, that was almost all thrown out the window when Austin would suffer a career-threatening injury at the hands of Owen Hart at SummerSlam 97. Before the match, Owen would suggest doing a sit-out tombstone piledriver to Austin. Austin would push back, saying that he wasn't comfortable with the non-kneeling version of the move, but Owen assured Austin that he would protect him. The fact that Owen would insist on this variation is surprising considering he had previously utilized the kneeling version during his match with his brother Bret at WrestleMania 10. During the match, the move would be performed incorrectly, with Austin's head being several inches below Owen's rear end. The result was Austin reportedly suffering a broken neck and temporary paralysis, and, wrestling being wrestling, they still did a finish, despite it being one of the worst roll-ups in history. This terrible moment actually has a pair of creepy coincidences attached to it. First of all, Austin was probably very aware of the sit-down tombstone, as he himself had performed the maneuver in the past to disastrous consequences. 5 years earlier, Steve Austin would square off against Japanese star Masahiro Chono on September 23, 1992 for the NWA World Heavyweight title. After a tombstone reversal spot, Austin would drop Chono with an errant sit-out tombstone piledriver that would break the champion's neck. And the other creepy coincidence is that as a way to build to an Owen Hart-Steve Austin rematch after the SummerSlam incident, Owen would mock Steve Austin's trademark Austin 316 shirt with a shirt that read Owen 316. However, instead of having a smoking skull on the back, Owen's shirt simply said, "I just broke your neck." 2 years later, a faulty harness would result in Owen Hart falling to his death from the rafters of the Kemper Arena during the 1999 Over the Edge pay-per-view, leaving this shirt as a dark reminder of that tragic accident. Number 7. A Fair Anagram. Well, this has been a dark episode. Maybe let's see if we can finish this with something a little bit lighter. As we mentioned earlier, Vince McMahon usually didn't have a problem bringing back talents that had wronged him or the company if there was an opportunity to make money. But it was always very odd the way the Macho Man Randy Savage left the WWE back in 1994. While most wrestlers would just vanish from the organization, never to be mentioned again, Randy received a very heartfelt farewell from Vince McMahon on Monday Night Raw. However, afterwards Savage became persona non grata around Titan Towers whenever discussions about bringing Savage back into the fold would be brought to McMahon. McMahon would promptly shoot them down, saying he didn't want to work with Savage again. It is believed by many that the reason McMahon held a grudge against Savage was because when Savage made the jump to WCW, he took the lucrative Slim Jim sponsorship with him. However, one theory that has truly stood the test of time is that McMahon learned that Savage was having an affair with his daughter Stephanie McMahon. Now, nobody knows if this is true. Savage's ex-girlfriend Stephanie Gorgeous George Bellows has stated that Savage admitted it was true during a drug-induced episode, but other than that, there really isn't any evidence. But one coincidence that is simply too powerful to overlook is the fact that Stephanie McMahon is an anagram for the Macho Man penis. Whoa. And it's important for you to know that we are not proud of that. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any other creepy WWE coincidences? If so, please leave them in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and RKO that notification bell. Until next time, I'm Singer Siete for 7 Wrestling saying bye-bye.